all of these SaaS businesses need the same core tools. They need payments, they need authentication, they need transactional emails, they need a CRM, they need a help desk. And at one point, he just kind of threw his hands up and he was like, I'm spending more time integrating software than I am building our actual product. Why isn't there sort of like a Shopify for SaaS?
Welcome to SaaS That App, building B2B web applications, the podcast where we share real-world stories, practical advice, and tech insights for those building or thinking about starting a tech-enabled business. I'm your co-host, Aaron Marchbanks.
And I'm Justin Edwards. Each week we bring you the stories, strategies, and insights you need to build your SaaS or tech-enabled business smarter, not harder. Let's dive right in. Everyone, how is it going? We're back for another fantastic episode of SaaS That App. I'm joined here today, as always, most always, from my friend who's residing in the frigid, frozen north. How is it going, my chilly snowman of a co-host?
It's going well. We're getting some actual snow melt now, and I can set foot outside and pound the pavement just a little bit, but it's still cold. However, they're saying by Friday it's going to be 50s. And so true to the Midwest, I'm going to wake up, today and it's 20, and I'm going to wake up Friday and it's going to be 50. So here we go.
If you live in the Midwest, you just bite off having crazy weather. It just comes with the territory. So cool. Well, let's kick us off. We have an awesome guest today. I'm super excited for the conversation. After getting his formal education, he kind of rolled directly into growing Buildium, which sold to RealPage for an eye-popping $580 million. That's million with an M. At that point, he moved to Roambee, which is another company he helped grow and scale, and that sold eventually to SAP. At that point, Geoff pivoted into Outseta, starting his own SaaS, his own company, as well as doing some consulting, where he's worked in that context with literally hundreds of startups. I'm super curious to learn from his learnings related to that. He's got a lot of really, really interesting insights about like life and company design. He's got a really interesting take on compensation, which we're going to get into for sure. It's going to be a fascinating conversation. Geoff, I can't wait to dig into your story. Welcome to the pod.
Justin, Aaron, thank you for having me. I appreciate it.
So tell us a little bit about kind of about early Geoff, kind of getting started and getting into this crazy business world.
Yeah, I found my way into the world of SaaS startups very accidentally. I actually went to college and was a writing major, and I graduated in 2008, kind of as the economy was tanking, and said, man, it's going to be tough to make it as a newspaper writer or a professional blogger or something like that. So I went back to school, went to business school, got out of business school, had trouble finding a job. And frankly, it just happened to be a SaaS startup that sort of gave me my first shot. Without knowing it, I walked into sort of a great situation. I joined a company where I was employee, I think 6 or 7, something like that. That was very engineering driven. They had found product market fit, but they sort of hadn't made a marketing push yet. And they said to me, hey, you young guy, go figure out how to market this thing. And I just had a great experience and fell in love with startups more than anything is what I tell people. SaaS is kind of the industry that I've been in ever since, but it's the startup bug that really caught me.
So was your second company also something that was smaller like that, where you were like one of the first few employees, or was your second gig longer or larger when you joined?
The second one was kind of the opposite. So this is Roambee, I think you're referring to. Roambee was a Sequoia-backed company that had sort of been a darling company for at least their early years, and then sort of fell on hard times and needed something of a turnaround. So after being at Buildium, where sort of everything went right, frankly, I walked into an environment with a lot more responsibility where everything was going wrong. So when I kind of think back on the early experiences in my career, that's how I classify those. And you sort of learn very different things in those environments. And I think part of what I learned was just the power of being in a great market that's underserved versus being in a market that is sort of turned against you a little bit.
Now, so when you say everything was going wrong, I'm super curious to unpack that a little bit. Obviously going into an ideal situation is like the first shot right out is always nice because it kind of sets you up. It's like, okay, I'm feeling some success, but tell me what you mean by like everything was going wrong.
Yeah, so not everything went wrong. I mean, Roambee, when I was there, I forget exactly, but it was something like a $10 million a year company. So they had built a substantial business, and I don't want to discredit that. But they got Sequoia on board because they were one of the first companies that tried to build data visualization tools specifically for the iPhone. So the iPhone came out, and the founder sort of saw this thing that was going to be in your pocket and an opportunity and all sorts of use cases to do sort of fancy data visualization on an iPhone. And I think they were right in seeing that opportunity, and Sequoia saw that opportunity and gave them a bunch of funding and those sorts of things. But they struggled to find the right target customer. They ended up going very, very enterprise and burning a lot of money on enterprise sales reps and fancy PR agencies and those sorts of things at a time where I think sort of traditional inbound marketing would have suited them better. So they always had this product that was sort of amazing from a user experience perspective, but never really quite figured out who the right customer was. And by the time I came around, I was basically tasked with coming in and saying, we need a completely different go-to-market strategy. We need to move away from this enterprise sales stuff, and with a lot less cash because they had burned a lot of cash, sort of kick this business back into gear. We did that, I think, to an extent. I mean, enough that SAP eventually came and sort of was a soft landing for the company, but certainly a very different environment than I had at Buildium.
So I'd be curious to know, so both of those companies exited while you were working there or with them. What was the difference like? Like, what were the differences exiting where something that went kind of crazy and grew and scaled and then sold kind of on this upswing versus you just described it as a soft landing for Roambee? Like, what was the difference between those two exits?
Yeah, the difference was huge. I mean, at Buildium, everybody involved in the company, from the employees to the investors to the founders, made money, and most of them for the first time. This was just startup exit where cash hit their bank accounts, and Buildium got an 11x revenue multiple, so it was a big win across the board for everybody. Roambee ended up in a good spot, but it was more of a situation where the employees certainly and none of the investors either made money, but the sort of the IP and a lot of the team ended up in sort of nice positions at SAP and carried on from there. So they sort of made the most of the opportunity that they had at that point.
Okay, but that wasn't your story. You did not go to SAP. So what happened next for you then at that point?
I did not go to SAP. I looked around. I started doing some consulting, worked a couple other gigs, and very shortly thereafter started Outseta. So at that point, my previous boss from Outseta, his name is Dimitri, was kind of looking around. He was ready to step away from Buildium and go sink his teeth into something new. And he came to me with the idea for Outseta, which is basically all of these SaaS businesses need the same core tools. They need payments, they need authentication, they need transactional emails, they need a CRM, they need a help desk. And in the early days of Buildium, I was kind of the annoying business user pulling on his shirt sleeves saying, hey, Dimitri, we need to get Stripe and HubSpot and Zendesk and integrate all this stuff. And at one point, he just kind of threw his hands up and he was like, I'm spending more time integrating software than I am building our actual product. Why isn't there sort of like a Shopify for SaaS? That was, in short, sort of the idea behind the company when we started, and still very much what we are today. But that's where it all came from. I had sort of lived that problem firsthand. So I said, yeah, I think an integrated solution is in fact better. It's just going to take a long time to build that and build it to the point where it's kind of good enough to compete with the point solutions that are out there. But we're now 9 years into doing just that.
That's awesome. I always find that the best ideas it's the whole, necessity is the mother of invention thing, right? It's like you say, you live in the problem. So the solution becomes more clear to you more quickly. and then that you've got the means and the skill set and the talent to go out and actually solve the problem or work toward the solution, I think is fantastic.
For sure. It's interesting too. Buildium was actually the same. So Buildium was a property management software product, but my co-founder, Dimitri, he literally had like a duplex and he got tired of cashing checks when his tenants sent in their rent every month. So he built a little software product that allowed his tenants to deposit rent online. 15 years later, he had a $500+ million exit. So a lot to be said for scratching your own itch.
Absolutely.
So give me a little bit of the pitch. Like if I have like a small SaaS, I've just maybe starting to find some product market fit. I have like $50,000 in ARR, and I'm just kind of like growing and scaling. Like how do I integrate with Outseta? Like what can Outseta do for my SaaS?
Yeah, so we try to we grow two ways, but we try to pick up customers as early as possible in their life cycle. If we can get to you before you even have sort of software systems in place, fantastic. But what actually drives our growth is migrations more than anything, where customers are bringing payment processing revenue onto our platform. But it's basically all of what we call like the business management layer required to run a SaaS. So at its core, it's a payments and authentication tool. You guys have launched SaaS products. You've probably integrated Stripe with some sort of auth provider that becomes kind of the foundation of your go-to-market engine and how people log into your product and all that. So that's the use case people initially buy for. We've just kind of then taken that. And first of all, we've connected the auth and payment dots for you. But then we've wrapped it with the other tools we sort of know that you'll inevitably need. So that's CRM, that's your emails, everything from automated emails to transactional emails to email broadcasts, help desk tools, docs, those sorts of things. So it's really a sort of a simplified one-stop shop approach to running a SaaS business as opposed to piecemealing all these different tools together. I readily admit, particularly with a technical audience, one of our learnings from building this company in general is developers like to piecemeal things together. That is in their nature. So this is certainly not for everybody, but what we have seen is there is a buyer persona, and maybe it's a smaller section of the market that does like this sort of integrated nature of the product. And also in developer circles, it's become very popular with people that launch products frequently and are sort of looking for speed to market. Those are areas where the product does really well.
Yes, we have a developer on our team who has tons of micro projects, and he launches stuff all the time. And like some of it fizzles, some of it gets some traction or whatever. But I was definitely thinking of him for this. It's just like, yeah, because especially he's more of a developer than like a business administration guy. So it's like, oh yeah, if he could just plug in with this one tool and get a better experience for users as he's trying to find product market fit with his new like hobby project, that seems really cool. Yeah, I went through this recently myself, and it's like, yeah, we have like 6 different things we had to piecemeal together, and I needed to have all these pieces, but it didn't exactly do my heart joy to spend all this time writing these integrations. So I love that. I think it's really cool. So you had talked about like kind of a smaller market segment or an area of people who this works for. I mean, is that heavily tied up with no code, low code founders, or can you speak a little bit to that? Real quick, this episode is brought to you by Delta Systems, which is what Aaron and I do when we're not talking through microphones to you, the people of the internet. We've got a really, really great software team here, and we love to work with cool people on cool projects. So if that sounds like you and you've got a problem or you're in some kind of a jam, go to deltasystems.com, grab the time with us. We can beat up on your problem together, and if there's a fit there, amazing, we'll help you out. So deltasystems.com, grab an appointment, and hey, maybe we can work together.
Yeah, so we've had a super interesting journey figuring out who our customer is and should be. We launched the tool very specifically focusing on developers. Our target customer was a SaaS founder, and we did that and sort of ran in that direction for 4 years hard. I would say we learned 2 things. We learned one, what I already mentioned, which is developers like to piecemeal together all these pieces. Second, we just learned how much time it was going to take to build sort of each of our feature sets to the point where it was truly competitive with what was out there. So our first 4 years were rough and lean. After that, we sort of got discovered pretty organically by what I'll call the no-code, low-code movement, or people building with Webflow and those sorts of things. And what we realized pretty quickly there was the value of what we had built was probably more valuable to this less technical buyer who didn't know how to integrate all this stuff. So all of a sudden, that was really the first inflection point in the company, and we started signing up all of these less technical customers, and not just helping them build SaaS, but helping them build like protected content, membership type websites, courses, those sorts of things. Anything where you need to charge for access to some sort of digital content, essentially.
Yeah, that's actually going to be one of my questions. It seems like a really natural fit for people that are running like any sort of a membership driven system, just subscription based. Yeah.
100%. So to the extent, if you look at our website today, like the headline is membership software, and we can talk about that. That is sort of an imperfect description of what we do, but it's the category that we fall into, I guess, most neatly. But today we have a customer base that honestly is like almost right down the middle, split between developers building SaaS products and less technical people building membership sites. And we have thought long and hard for years about whether we need to move in one direction or the other. And everyone says, look at your data, who's the clearly better customer? We don't have a clearly better customer. And now the market is evolving again. We've been doing this long enough. We sort of lived through these evolutions, but now we're seeing both our non-technical and technical customers increasingly use AI tools. And we're figuring out, we have sort of this infrastructure layer for all these different types of digital businesses. How do we fit into the AI landscape and enable people building with Claude or Cursor to use Outseta? So that's kind of the topic of the day internally for us now.
Yeah, it makes sense. This is really the first year that the last few months is kind of the first time that I've thought that some AI code generation tool was actually ready for prime time. And I didn't have an opportunity to demo some of the more expensive ones that have been around for longer. But now it's definitely in the mainstream. And I think I think it's a good question to be answering. I think that we're going to see software development, software engineering change dramatically this year. We did a predictions episode earlier in the year in January, and that was one of the things is just like this is going to be the first year where the majority of code out there in the landscape is written by an LLM and not by a person.
I think that's right. That's certainly, we've always had sort of an interesting position on this topic because we have this mixture of customers that's technical and non-technical. And even amongst the technical customers, an awful lot of the people that were skeptics are sort of starting to transition towards using these tools in a bigger way, at least from what we're seeing.
Is anything factoring into your decision making on these two like slightly different or maybe widely different buckets to like forking the product?
Yes. So one of the things we're generally concerned about and always have been is we kind of create this confusion, and you can see some ways on our website where we've tried to deal with this. But if we're using membership software language and no code language, that is pretty different from what a developer would look for if they wanted to use Outseta and build a SaaS product. And we're kind of talking out of both sides of our mouths. And we know that there is some cost to that. And aside from that, there are pretty dramatic differences. Most of our low code customers are using client-side content protection. It's super easy to set up. There's no back-end database. We're just gating content with JavaScript. And that's certainly something people that are building a membership site that needs to be more secure, or people building SaaS do not want. So how do we sort of differentiate and lead people down the right path, both from a marketing perspective, but also from a documentation perspective? And I'd say we haven't totally figured that out yet, but as we're talking about not just how to bridge that gap with humans, but also with LLMs, the conversation is pretty quickly coming to we need sort of a fork in the road relatively early where you self-identify who you are, and then we can point you down the path best suited for you.
So I have this is where I think we move to the philosophy section of the call, because you have some really interesting ideas that I'm curious to have a discussion about it. So. I guess, could you speak a little bit, you talk about like a people-friendly approach and maybe kind of marrying like profitability in a way that's not exactly like monetary versus, just you have thoughts on this, give me something, I'm very curious.
Yeah, so the phrase that I'll latch onto is not mine. It's a guy named Adi Pinar, who's a South African SaaS founder, but he uses the word life profitability. And he sort of put language to something I'd been thinking about for a long time. But the idea is when it comes to the financial performance of our companies. You can you can pull any founder off the street and they know how many free trials they're getting, how much MRR they're doing, how much revenue they made last year, down to like the dollar. But that's only one method of sort of accounting for your company's performance. And another one that I think is very worthy, and certainly the reason I became an entrepreneur is your company and your work actually benefiting your life and enriching your life in some way? And I think most people, that's part of the reason why they start companies or get into entrepreneurship. Sure, there's the financial piece as well, but they're looking for some degree of freedom. And that was certainly true of me. And there isn't a way to quantify that, but I certainly view a huge part of my reason for starting Outseta, and much of my goals at Outseta are around enabling a work environment where, for myself and for the other people on our team, they have sort of maximum life profitability, and we enable them to do the things with their life that they want to outside of work. So that's the concept in short.
What means do you use for that enablement?
So I think there's a lot of things. Certainly cash is part of it, right? Money is sort of the lifeblood of daily life, and you need enough of it to feel like you're able to breathe and pursue the things that you want to do. So compensation and building a successful business is part of it. A lot of it is just flexibility, and a lot of it is enabling a work environment where people work very autonomously. Part of the reason we run the company the way we do, which I'm sure we'll get into in a minute, is we kind of looked around and said, like, nobody wants to be bossed around. Nobody wants to be told what to do, particularly if you're a little bit later in your career and you're a competent person. It's very attractive, I think, to most people to want to work autonomously and have minimal engagements and things like that. So yeah, if you show up and work at Outseta, it's a super flexible work environment, which I'll hit on in a minute, but we could care less when you work, where you work, how you work. As long as you're doing good work, we're happy, and that's what our model's all about.
I say that all the time in job interviews when I'm interviewing candidates, because our philosophy is the exact same way. We don't go, you have some different ideas that we don't do, which I'm curious to dig into. But yeah, that's the same way. It's like, you're a programmer, you're a professional. I need to be able to meet with you. But other than that, like, where you work, when you work, it's very much up to you, as long as like you can be available to be part of a team when you need to be part of a team. I think it's a good way to treat professionals. I like that you're doing that. Can you speak, before we get into compensation, can you speak a little bit to having a non-hierarchical company and how you kind of have like a more democratized like business administration philosophy?
Yeah, so there's a book called Reinventing Organizations by a guy named Frederick Laloux, just to like give you something concrete to latch onto, that introduces this concept called self-management. And it basically makes a case for, you can run a business without traditional top-down hierarchy if you sort of build the business in a way where you have processes to deal with the things that traditional top-down management typically does. He makes a pretty extensive case and gives lots of examples of companies that are doing this at scale. So I think there are a lot more examples of companies doing this at scale than people think. I'm pretty forthcoming, and I think this only really works in smaller teams, but we sort of want to operate our company as a smaller team, so it works great for us. But basically, the idea is we are hiring the best people we possibly can, and we sort of just set them free to contribute in the areas where they're most able to contribute to the company. So, in short, a lot of what I think has to happen for this to work is just transparent sharing of information. Everybody needs to know everything about our business, like what we're trying to accomplish, what our financials look like. We all have to be very aligned on sort of what the path to get there looks like. But if everybody has all the information, and we'll get into the structure in a minute, but everybody is very aligned by our incentive structure, then everybody is naturally going to sort of row in the same direction more easily than you might expect. So that's the concept in short.
I love that. It hits on two things that are very key for me, which is, surround yourself with very smart people and do your best to not get in their way. And then two, just a story when I've been here at the company that we're working at now for almost 20 years now. The gentleman who hired me is still one of the owners of the company. And when I came in, it was a much smaller team, about the quarter of the size of what it is now. And I asked him that question of, where do you see me folding into this organization? What does your structure look like? And he got out a piece of paper and just drew a circle and put the word workers in the middle. It's like, I can work here. This is great.
With the kind of this very flat, non-hierarchical organization, you have a compensation structure and an incentive structure that's well, non-traditional or very different than how we normally think about that. Could you speak a little bit about what Outseta is doing for that and why?
Yeah, so we call it our choose your own adventure compensation model. But I'll give you sort of the three pillars of it. But before I get there, this wasn't like, let's sit down and come up with a funky compensation model. We started from a place of, we want to build an ambitious software product with a team that's as small as possible, and retain people on the team in perpetuity, essentially. Like that was the thing that we latched onto. We said, we do not want to be a big company. We want to see how far we can go with a small team of really committed people. How do we make that happen? So then we moved into, okay, what does compensation have to look like? And there's sort of three parts of our model. The first is everyone is paid the same. So a full-time salaried Outseta today is $210,000 a year. There's no magic to that number. That is just a number that we said is a pretty healthy salary commensurate with hiring good senior people. That's literally all there is to it. The second bit was, we looked around and we said, there's so many talented people out there that have their own startup projects or other things that they're working on part-time. We would much rather have somebody awesome 2 days a week than somebody, lesser 5 days a week. So we wanted to create an environment where people can work as much or as little on Outseta as they wanted. And we said, okay, we're going to allow anyone to work anywhere from 1 to 5 days per week. So if you work 1 day per week, you make $42,000 per year. If you work 2 days a week, you make $84,000 a year, all the way up to the $210,000 salary. Then the third piece was really the most important piece. And this was, how do we get people on this team for the long haul? And also just, looking out at the landscape of how things typically go when tech companies have exits. Everybody knows it's like the founders and the investors that make out like bandits. And a lot of times, even when there's a successful exit, employees don't do so well. So we said, we want to spread their wealth around should this thing go well. What does that look like? And we basically said, we're going to give everybody the exact same opportunity to earn equity in the company as the founders and everybody else. And we're not going to raise money from investors. So our investors will be talented people who have decided to devote some of their time to working on Outseta in exchange for equity. So what does that actually mean? Let's say all time amongst all of our employees, 100 days people have elected to work for equity. So anyone on our team can say, I want to work 1 day a week for equity. I want to work 2 days a week for equity, whatever it might be. If 100 days have been worked all time for equity, and I have worked 20 of those, I own 20% of the business. And we have done this since we started. So we literally have a spreadsheet that's just like, how many days all time has each employee devoted to working for equity? And everybody's equity stake is exactly representative of sort of how much sacrifice they have made for equity in the business. So the result is today we're a company of 7. My co-founder Dave owns, I think, 28% of the business at this point, and our shortest tenured employee owns like 2.5% of the company, but everyone else is somewhere in the middle.
So, like, where did this idea come from? Is this your brainchild just from having a brainstorming session, or what was the origin material of this? It's a really cool idea.
Yeah, it was, literally just what's a salary that we think is healthy. We sort of knew that we wanted to hire all people of sort of, I don't want to say similar caliber, but more senior level employees. And we sort of knew that by standardizing the salary, people would select in or select out. I mean, if your goal is to go work at Meta and make $600,000 per year, you're not going to want to work at Outseta anyways. So we felt like it would attract the right caliber of person who was was interested in the type of flexibility and working style that we wanted. And then from an alignment perspective, really the equity is the key thing. I mean, when everybody has the amount of skin in the game that they have at Outseta, it's like if you're not showing up every day and busting your butt and working hard, you're only shooting yourself in the foot. And, a lot of other startups issue stock options, but to the vast majority of employees, those stock options are immaterial or not that exciting. To everybody on our team, the stock options are a big deal. So it's crazy. If you want, I say all the time, if you want people to act like owners, there's no better way to make that happen than to give people ownership. So that's the idea in short.
I love that. That's a great quote.
So do you have future plan? Like, what are your future plans for Outseta in terms of like, what is, I realize it's not your thing exclusively, but what is the Council of Equals at Outseta? Do you guys have like a 5-year, 10-year plan for like looking at an acquisition, or are you just doing what you're doing?
Yeah, so we said at the outset that we were going to build this thing for 15 years. And we chose the idea as well because we were like, this is a big, meaty enough idea that it's going to hold our attention for 15 years. And when I say that, I feel exhausted. And boy, did we get what we wished for. But the point is, I think realistically, like we are looking at this through the lens of we're going to work on it for 6 more years. And there's nothing magic about 15, of course, but we're going to look up and sort of see where we're at that point. But we're also at an interesting, I don't want to say a point of transition in the company today, but the company is successful, it's profitable, it's stable, it grew 55% last year. So things are good. But we kind of feel like we know the path that we're on. It is sort of slow and steady growth, and that is fine. We are not necessarily like empire builders internally, I would say. But we also feel, particularly like with the emergence of AI and with the amount of infrastructure that we sort of can give you in a single package, there is an opportunity for us to go bigger, go faster, and maybe have some more sort of exponential upside. I think there's a lot of different routes we could go, but we know that we need to make a more sort of bold and focused decision around our product strategy going forward. And that's a major topic of conversation internally right now. Like, what is our appetite for risk? What does that look like? What's the bet that we wanted to make if we wanted to make a much riskier bet, sort of based on what we've already got? So that's the soup du jour at Outseta today.
Nice. Yeah, I read something that you wrote, I think it was middle of last year or something, that, what keeps you up at night is the possibility of thinking too small and missing an opportunity. And I think that's a tremendous statement, and that seems to be what's motivating and moving you all in the right direction.
It is. And like, I don't want to discount it. It took us a long time to get this business to the point where it was profitable and doing well and all that kind of stuff. So it almost feels easy to be somewhat complacent, but we're also looking at it through the lens of we've got something that we think is an asset. We've already put 9 years of effort into this. Like, let's squeeze the juice out of the orange and figure out how to do so. So fun conversations internally on what that looks like.
Sorry, I also wanted to mention, because I think that I read you also have a 50% profit share program in addition to your compensation and equity option.
Mm-hmm.
That's so you take 50% of your profits, and that gets distributed out among the people on the team.
That's correct. This is actually, to be fair, we have not done that yet. We have chosen every year to reinvest the profits back into the growth of the business. This year, we talked about at the end of the year, this year is going to be the first year that we distribute profits. So we're excited about that.
Very cool.
Too.
I think that's awesome. I think it's cool there's a council of folks who get to vote on that too, where you have your group of people who decide.
That people are always shocked by this. So we literally, we have some like decision-making processes internally, because there isn't a CEO or a hierarchy to handle some of these things. But when it comes to the biggest decisions a company could face, like, are we going to sell or whatnot, we literally vote. It's a democracy. We need a 2/3 majority to make a decision, but we have a voting structure in place to make those decisions.
That's it's fascinating. It's not something I've ever heard of before, so I'm really glad you came on to tell us about it. It's given me a lot to talk. You've given me a lot to think about and a couple books to read, so I always appreciate that. Wanted to kind of pivot back a little bit out of philosophy and into some more practical stuff. We have a lot of listeners who are working on SaaS, software-enabled companies. You've done a lot of consulting with SaaS and product founders. What are some of the trends of things you see people making mistakes on? What are some like big lifts that you see across all the people you've worked with? Recommendations, advice you'd give?
The answer that I always give, but it's the truthful answer. It is a sort of framework for advising SaaS startups that comes from Mark Roberts, who was the initial CRO of HubSpot. And it's he says you need to focus on customer success first, unit economics second, and then growth third. And the basic idea is, before you do anything, you have to figure out how to make people successful with your product. And until you do that, nothing else matters. It doesn't have to be profitable. You just need to figure out how to help people achieve whatever it is they're trying to achieve. Only after you've gotten really good at that do you say, okay, we need to do this profitably now. We need to make, our customer acquisition costs reasonable. We need to turn this into a machine that actually makes money, and you put $1 in and you get $2 out. And only once you've done that should you actually focus on growth. And that sounds so obvious and so simple, but nobody takes that to heart to the extent that they should. I think particularly in early stage startups. So he really advocates for like being very slow and really rigorous about identifying when you've figured out customer success, when you've got the unit economics where they need to be, and then focusing on growth. What you see in most companies, you launch an MVP and then you just immediately hit the marketing button and try to grow, and you haven't figured out how to make customers successful yet, and your CAC gets out of whack and customers churn, and basically all problems in SaaS, not all problems in SaaS, but a huge percentage of problems in SaaS can tie back to those things not being done in order. And I think that is so true. So that is something I have always tried to preach from a consulting perspective. It is amazing. My background is in marketing, so I've been in plenty of organizations where I have preached that. And you can get CEOs nodding and saying that makes sense, but at the end of the day, they don't follow that advice. They just want to see you go do marketing and spend money and think that they're going to sort of market their way out of fundamental issues in their business model or whatever it might be. So that's the big one. The other one that comes to mind immediately is I'm a huge advocate for the market you choose dictates your success to a large extent. That doesn't mean execution isn't important. That doesn't mean, all the other things that go into building a SaaS aren't important. But if you're in a good market, everything feels easy. If you're in a bad market, everything feels hard. And more people should think long and hard about that early on.
Yeah, we've had a few guests on, and it's not a universal truth, but I'm just going to say the vast majority of the time it's situations more similar to yours, where it's you've lived in a problem, you understand what the solution should be, and you work to solve that problem, find success much more quickly or at all, and versus not even, as you say, kind of like testing the market, as it were. It's like I had an idea. And then we just, tried to go to town on that. We're not seeing success. Well, why is that? It's almost invariably we didn't solve the right problem, or we were the only ones with the problem. and so they see less success on that road. And it's just interesting to hear, they call it a failing, but, I'm a firm believer in it's not so much a failure as it is a learning opportunity, but they learn from that. And then the very next thing that they talk about is, so we took what we learned and we did this, and now it's so much better. And it's always such an interesting curve for me.
I would tell you point blank, it's the oldest lesson in the book, and I had heard it a million times before we started Outseta and whatnot, but I will never start another company that sells to startups. It's something we're doing today. It's just a fundamental truth. It's like, if you sell to the smallest of small businesses, they're going to churn at a high rate. We've, figured out how to keep our customer acquisition costs extraordinarily low and operate the business in a lot of ways that are very, very lean to make the economics work. But we have a huge tailwind blowing in our face all the time, compared to, say, like a podcast hosting company where, people continue to pay for podcast hosting years after they've ever recorded a podcast episode. So a lesson learned the hard way.
Yeah, we had a great guest on early in the show named Joe Kowalski, and his customers were people who ran like carpet cleaning, rug cleaning businesses. And so he had this churn number, which is higher than he wanted. And he started doing some investigating into it. And he's like, oh, well, it's 3% of this is people who just aren't doing that business anymore. They were last year and they're not this year. So this is my organic baseline churn. And there's nothing I can do to save these customers because they're not in business anymore. And I imagine you have a similar thing as well, working with a lot of startups.
100%. Yep.
So that makes sense. Working with startups is really rewarding, but also really hard. So,
for sure.
I love the 3-step process as well. If you don't have customer success, you have an idea, not a business. And you need unit economics to make sense before you can scale, because if you lose money on every deal, you can't make it up in volume. So that makes sense. This has been a really interesting chat, and especially with like org structure, comp structure, you give me a lot to think about, because I talk with a lot of small companies and have been known to start 1 or 2 of my own, and I'm very curious about some of these ideas.
Yeah, one final thought there. I have no attachment, like to our particular compensation model or running a flat organization or anything like that. Those are specific elements of the way that we chose to operate this business, and I am definitely an advocate for. I think our structure is one of our strengths and sort of a strategic advantage. But I just want to see more people think about this stuff and be willing to innovate on how they build companies. Like the tech industry is obsessed with tech innovation, but there's so little innovation around how companies are built and managed and structured and all that stuff. And the truth is, like, I hear so much trepidation on these topics about like legal structures, and lawyers aren't going to be familiar with this stuff. It doesn't matter. You can do whatever you want for the most part if you're willing to put on your creative thinking cap. And I think there's a lot of benefit to doing so. So that's what I would like to encourage.
Love that. That's a great last thought.
People get hung up with like, no, it's the job of the lawyers to protect us and to take our will and put it into paperwork and make it defensible. It's our job to define what's going on. Anytime you go through a negotiation with someone who thinks their lawyer is part of the negotiations, it's like, no, that's not how this works. We reach an agreement and the lawyer makes it in writing and makes it enforceable. Like, I don't want to talk to your lawyer about the terms of the deal. He's not involved between you and me. And it's always irritating. Anyway, awesome. Well, where can people connect with you? Where would you like to send people who found you interesting and want to see more of your stuff?
Yeah, I'd love for people just to go to outseta.com. It's the word outset with an A slapped on the end, just to make it sound startup-y. And you can find me. I'm on Twitter, Blue Sky, LinkedIn, most social channels. I am a Geoff. It's Geoff, Geoff Roberts. But I'll chat with anyone there.
Awesome. Well, thanks so much for being on. It was a great conversation. Aaron, always good to see you. Thanks everyone for hanging out, and we'll see you next time.
Thanks so much for having me, guys.
Thanks for cruising along with us on SaaS That App. We hope you grabbed some insights that were inspiring, actionable, or at least entertaining.
If you enjoyed the show, don't forget to subscribe and leave a review.
Until next time, keep building, keep growing, and keep those apps sassy.